I will try to put together a bit of what usually we don't talk so many about when we speak about Moroccan Jews in Israel, and this is their contribution to a main task of Zionism and of the state of Israel, and this is settling the land of Israel. So, that works, right? We check it? Yes. Settling the land in Israel was one of the two major tasks of Zionism. The major task of Zionism was the Exodus, the bringing of Jews to the land of Israel. But this was not enough. And the other thing was to spread them all around the country. And there was a kind of an image that the Israeli or the pre-state society was a very collective, people were always living in collective and agricultural settlements. The reality, however, was that the majority of pre-state land of Israel Jews were living in towns, in big cities. Tel Aviv, for example, I'm thinking only of Tel Aviv, not of the suburb of Tel Aviv. 40% of the population was living in one town. 86% of the population were not farmers. And the majority of the people lived in the short strip. So actually, it was not only a question of motivation, it was also a question of politics and security, because the land purchase during the last decade of the mandate period was limited. So as much as Zionism wanted to spread all around the country, it was not possible. So by the turning point of the Declaration of Independence of Israel, the majority of the population were living in a very small area, crowded on the shore in big cities, and the majority of the land owned or controlled by the state of Israel was actually empty. The idea of something historian of Zionism or regular of Zionism is that the need to settle the land was that wherever farmers are working, this is the way the borders will be decided. And after the Declaration of Independence and after the War of Independence, the borders were already decided. So why there is a need to more settlements? However, the need always existed, because even after statehood and after deciding about the borders, there was always a dispute, international dispute and neighbor dispute. What are exactly the borders of Israel? This dispute about territories did not start in 1967. So for this reason, areas that were behind the line of partition of 1947, but inside the green line, were areas of dispute. For example, the Shemesh area, people that are familiar around Jerusalem, Arad area, all those areas were a kind of dispute, and it was important for the government of Israel to settle people there. There was also a question of security. After statehood, it was clear that the army is not enough to control the borders, and it's important to have settlers along the borders to prevent a future war and to prevent infiltration. And also the idea that if there won't be enough Jews sitting and farming the land and producing food, there won't be enough food to the growing population. So it was also a question of economics. This in 1950s, in the 1950s in Israel, there was not enough capital to start industry, and the majority of the large place that people can work were actually agriculture. So it wasn't also important to settle the land. And the main end of Zionism was not only bringing Jews to Zion, but changing the Jews. And putting the Jews or settling people on the land was also a way to change the idea or the image of the diaspora Jews who is not doing anything, is Luftgeschäft, and is air businesses in Moroccan, and is actually creating something. So Zionism was also about this kind of ideology. So all these reasons contribute to the fact that the idea of settling the land continued even after statehood. How common or how important was this idea? It's important to take a little look about numbers. In the 5 years following statehood, between 1948 and 1953, 422 new settlements, villages and towns, were founded. Comparing to what happened before statehood, for 70 years, since the establishment of Petah Tikva, that is in some way the ground zero of Zionism, until statehood, about 300 new Jewish settlements were founded. In the 5 following years, the numbers increased to 422. So I think in the whole history of the land of Israel, since the prehistoric period till today, there was never just a kind of enthusiasm of creating new places, new villages, and new settlements, like in the 5 years following Declaration of Independence. Who will be sitting in all those places? So the regular answer is clear. The immigration, or the mass immigration, the immigrants that will arrive immediately after statehood. And after statehood, in the first 3 years, 700,000 immigrants arrived, actually doubling the number of the population in Israel, something that never happened in world history, that this huge wave of immigration arriving in such a short time and completely doubling the number of the original people. So I see I have another figure, but where those immigrants were settled, so the first places were transit camps in tents, because trying to connect between those flows of immigrants arriving very fast because of catastrophe in their own countries, and the way or the building of the town was not very successful. And some of them were sent to the first remote moshavim, those rural settlements, but what happened that the majority was sent to the ma'abarot. We can translate ma'abarot to transit camps. It's not exactly the same as immigrant camps. In the first year, 1949, immigrants were sent to camps that 50 families were together in one cabin. And there was not even a private tent to every family. Later on, and they couldn't work, and they were fitted by the Jewish Agency. Later on, the government and the Jewish Agency changed its policy, and they moved to transit camps that each family had its own tent. Later on, kind of a cabin, and they could work outside. The majority of the ma'abarot, although we have an image that is connecting ma'abarot to a development town and peripheral places, the majority of the ma'abarot were placed in the center of Israel, because the way to absorb new immigrants, always in all the world, is in the big towns. The immigration arriving to the US arrived not far away to the Lower East Side, in the big town of New York. Coming from China is arriving to Los Angeles and San Francisco. Immigrants are never going to small places. They need the big city with a lot of jobs and a lot of opportunity. From the point of view of the society, it's also very important that they go to the main places to get education, to get culture, to be integrated in society. So there is no good reason to send immigrants to remote places, except of the ideology I mentioned earlier. So if we can just take a look on the placement of the ma'abarot. Hope I can show you. Working? No. Oh, okay. There is something. Anyway, you can see on the left map that the majority of the black spots are in the center of the country. The right map is showing where North African immigrants that arrived later were placed. And you see that this is the north and the south and nothing in the center. So the Mabarot actually contribute very little to dispersion of population. And North African Jews, and especially Moroccan Jews, and I will say a little bit about the difference when I say North African and when I say Moroccan, but were very little represented among Mabarot dwellers. The majority of Mabarot dwellers were from other countries. Now, there was a huge crisis, and I see that I'm running out of time, in those hundreds of new moshavim built in 1950 and 53, till 1953, because the Jewish Agency built those moshavim, founded, but then tried to convince immigrants to move there. In the first stage, it was easy, because when they were living in immigrants' camps, very crowded, many families in the same cabin, it was attractive. Later on, when they moved to the Ma'abarot, those transit camps, it was less attractive, and it was clear that those remote places, you have no doctors, no medicine facilities, some of them are facing security problems along the border, and people were more reluctant of moving there. So by 1954, many of the new immigrants preferred to stay in temporary housing in very bad conditions, but in the center, they moved to permanent housing in the remote area of the country. Even those who moved to those areas abandoned them, and here you have some figures about the numbers, how many empty houses were there, how many people left those moshavim, how many places were actually ghost town because everybody left and nobody stayed there. And in this point, I'm connecting to the conference. Now comes the Moroccan Jews. Now, I'm moving from talking about Moroccan to talking about North African because in the first years, the statistics of the Jewish Agency and of the Israeli government is taking all the three countries of French North Africa, Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco, as one country. And we don't have distinguished numbers between Moroccan and Tunisian Jews. And I don't say nothing about Algerian Jews because they never came. They stayed in Algeria and later on moved to France. So we are basically, when we're speaking about North African Jews, we are speaking about 3/4 of them were Moroccan, about 20% were Tunisian, and about 5% or less were Algerian. So some of the statistics I will be speaking about North African, some of them I will have numbers about Moroccan as a separate group. But this is the number, and as mentioned earlier in previous discussion, the Moroccan Jewish community is the largest community in the Islamic world. 250,000 Jews, it's a huge number. However, when we're comparing to European communities, 250,000 Jews, it's not a very large community. Hungary before the war had 800,000 Jews. Poland had 3 million, Romania had about 350,000, France had more Jews than Morocco. So when we are comparing those things, but inside the Islamic world, Morocco is a big community. Why these Jews didn't came in a mass before 1954 during the mass immigration? So the main reason was French colonialism. And French colonialism gave a kind of security to the Jews. And by the summer of 1954, French colonialism started to move. Not to crack yet, but it's clear that after Dien Bien Phu, it won't be long that the French will leave North Africa. And the Jews felt that they would become the victims of an anti-colonial struggle in Morocco, and as they become, I won't say first-class citizens, but not second-class citizens in French North Africa, they assume that in Islamic North Africa or Arab North Africa, they won't stay in the same position. And perhaps they'll be second-grade citizen, perhaps something else, it won't be the same thing. So things are moving, and the Jews of North Africa are looking for a solution. And the solution would be Aliyah. Why they're not moving to France? Because they can't. Because France won't accept natives from Morocco, although they are part of the Jewish faith. Only very few of Moroccan Jews had a French citizenship, about 6%, and the majority of them were not able to move to France. The story of Algerian Jews is completely different, and the story of Tunisian Jews is in the middle in some way. And the Jewish agency adopted a new policy, saying, look, the Jews of Morocco are leaving, but it's not a rush like the Jews of Yemen and the Jews of Iraq. So we'll adopt a policy that we will connect the immigration of Jews to the needs of the country, and we will send them, the name of the policy was ship to village. So we will send them on the same day they will arrive to Israel, we will send them to some of those villages that I just mentioned earlier were founded in the early 1950s, and some of them were half empty or completely empty. So they said, look, the French are still there. And if those Jews want to come to Israel, like any other immigration country, we need to give them what are the clear conditions. And one of them is that they need to sign a commitment, here you see it in Hebrew and French, that they are willing to live wherever the government will send them. And if they won't go to those places, they cannot ask for any help for the government. So it's not like you are a slave and you must go there. But if you want to have some help from the government, those are the conditions. And they sent not to transit camps, but directly to the Moshavim. I won't go into the details, but there was a lot of control, same-day transportation, and they arrived most of the time to permanent housing, like in Moshav Otzem, we see here in the movie, empty new places. After all those empty houses were filled up, they arrived to those places. And you see here the map I showed earlier, but the contribution is huge. About 50 Moshavim was expanded, 45 new Moshavim were founded, 11 small towns, actually known as development towns, were expanded, and 7 new towns were founded. And the numbers are important, but it's also important to mention that the idea was that they are not choosing that. Perhaps they signed the commitment before arriving, but they're not sure or understand what they signed. This is a quote from Giora Yoseftal, who was head of the social department, saying that we are doing what we can and not what they choose. Why North African? I will skip it. It's about timing, it's about other things, but now the numbers. The contribution of North African Jews to the Israeli periphery is huge. You see the number, but more important, look at this is the distribution of all the population in the census of 1961. You see the south and the north, that is the periphery, in the blue and red. Now see how all the groups of immigrants, Mizrahi and Ashkenazi as well, so Iraqi, Yemenites, Romanian and Polish are spread in the country. You see that the portion of blue and red are about the same. And the only group that is different is North African Jews. That half of the North African Jews are placed in the periphery, in the north and the south. And it's completely different, not from Ashkenazi, from everybody. So saying that, sending those Jews to the periphery was kind of discrimination, you can ask yourself, so why you discriminate North African Jews and you not discriminate, Yemenite Jews or Iraqi Jews? So I think it's more complicated than discrimination, and I see the attitude in Israel was that going to the periphery, it's not a punishment. It's a virtue. It's something that people want. And I collect some headlines showing how the North African Jews were praised, were admired because they are contributing to the periphery. It was never a secret, it was never hidden, and it was never a kind of a punishment. So, and we can see here the numbers, it continue. Again, 1972, you see on the up left side, you see the whole population, you see the blue and the red, small portion, you see Romanian, Iraqis, Yemenite and Polish, also small population of red and blue, and then you see the North African population, and continue on an only group that is overrepresented in the periphery. And in a way, if I will summarize now, in a way, the contribution of the immigrants from North Africa, majority of them from Morocco, to populating Israel periphery and populating the places that were not populated, and helped the Israeli government to, observe its control, to show its power, to show its sovereignty, were the Moroccan Jews. And when it happened, it was something to be proud of, something to show. Moroccan Immigrants Federation asked the government to continue the immigration from North Africa and fight for it against the king of Morocco that stopped it, because the only people that are contributing to settling the land of Israel are North African Jews. They never saw it, as now people saw it in Israel, as a kind of punishment set up on Moroccan Jews because they were looked as primitive or something like that. It was exactly the opposite. In the first wave of Iraqi Jews, there was a lot of disappointment why Iraqi Jews are not going to rural settlement. And when Moroccan Jews arrived, in the beginning, people say it will never work. People that were never educated in youth movement will never succeed as farmers. And when it was so successful, the image, the public image of North African Jews changed completely. Thank you very much.